Welcome to Sleep Story Room. Tonight, we'll drift into the calm and distant world of ancient Greece, but not the exciting tales of heroism or the loud battles you might have heard. No. Tonight, we will explore the most boring parts of Greek myths, the everyday, the ordinary, the stories that never made it to the front page of Olympus. Let's gently float past the clouds into the quiet halls of the ancient gods, where time moves slowly, where even the mighty Zeus takes long, boring naps. So find your comfortable place, close your eyes, and let's begin. When people think of Zeus, they usually imagine a powerful figure perched upon his grand throne atop Mount Olympus, lightning bolt in hand, ready to hurl it down upon mortals and gods alike. They picture him as a bold leader, full of drama, anger, and booming declarations. But what many stories fail to mention is that Zeus, like any ruler, had another side to his reign, an incredibly boring administrative side that consumed much of his immortal life. In fact, the grand and thunderouses spent more time shuffling scrolls and attending tedious meetings than he did commanding storms every morning. As the first light of dawn touched the marble columns of Olympus, Zeus would reluctantly rise from his plush, cloud-soft bed. His mornings did not begin with battles or celebrations, but with routine. He would stretch slowly, his joints creaking despite his divine status, and make his way to his enormous stone desk, which overlooked the vast expanse of the sky. On this desk, piles upon piles of scrolls awaited him. Reports, requests, complaints, endless streams of divine paperwork that required his careful, albeit uninterested, attention. You see, being the king of the gods was not all glory and spectacle. There were weather petitions from farmers, disputes between minor deities, temple construction approvals, and the ever-important allocation of sunshine hours. Each scroll carried with it the dull weight of bureaucracy. Zeus would often sigh as he unraveled the first scroll of the day. The scroll might be from a tiny village pleading for rain, request for 3 days of mild rain to assist with the barley harvest. He would scratch his beard, sign the parchment with his golden seal, and move on to the next. The requests came from all over the ancient world, and though Zeus had the power to summon storms and create sunshine at will, the careful balance of nature required proper scheduling. The god of thunder found himself bound by an intricate calendar, color-coded by Hermes, the messenger god and part-time administrator. Hermes had insisted on organization. Zeus, however, often daydreamed during planning sessions. As Hermes droned on about seasonal rainfall quotas and sunrise rotations, Zeus would lean on his elbow, his eyelids growing heavy. One particularly uneventful morning, Zeus spent nearly an hour debating whether to approve an extra hour of sunshine for a small island off the coast of what would one day be called Greece. The local priest had sent multiple scrolls, insisting that the island's olives required more light. Zeus lazily traced circles on his desk as he mulled it over. 1 hour, perhaps 2, he murmured, scribbling a half-hearted approval. The sun's movement would, of course, need to be communicated to Apollo, the sun god, who himself had a reputation for being meticulous about his chariot schedule. Zeus would eventually need to attend another meeting with Apollo, where the sun god would present charts and timetables to discuss the minor adjustments in his daily route. These meetings often lasted well into the afternoon, with Apollo explaining the precise angles and distances required to maintain the Earth's balance. Zeus rarely paid attention. His mind wandered to the next snack or his next nap. While Apollo passionately described solar arcs, Zeus's head would gently bob forward, eyelids heavy, occasionally jolting awake just in time to nod, as though he had been listening all along. And then there were the disputes. The minor river gods, the lesser-known wind spirits, The demigods with boundary complaints all lined up in a constant stream, seeking Zeus's judgment. They would argue over the smallest details: which breeze should cool which village, which river had rights to which fish, whether a particular patch of sky should host a rainbow. Each presented their case with a seriousness that Zeus found almost amusing. Sometimes he would let them drone on for hours, their voices becoming a soft, rhythmic hum that lulled him toward sleep. Other times, he would wave his hand dismissively and assign the decision to Hera, his wife, who was far more patient with such matters. Hera herself would occasionally join him in the grand, echoing chamber where these dull proceedings were held. She sat with perfect posture, listening intently, while Zeus slouched on his throne, propping his chin with his hand. Hera would scold him when he appeared disinterested, but Zeus would only offer a lazy grin in response. "Not every day needs thunder and spectacle, Hera," he would say, his voice slow and soft. "Some days are just ... paperwork." One day, the god of dreams, Morpheus, stopped by during one of these long, dragging council sessions. Zeus asked if Morpheus could perhaps liven up the proceedings with some dreamlike illusions. Morpheus smiled politely and declined, explaining that even dreams had their limits. So Zeus returned to his scrolls, approving or denying temple expansions, deciding whether a mountain should receive an extra layer of snow, addressing a particularly passionate letter from a fisherman requesting calm seas for his son's wedding voyage. The calendar Hermes maintained grew thicker, but the days grew slower. Zeus would often retreat to his garden after these long hours of mind-numbing work. Sitting among the olive trees, he would sip ambrosia and stare at the sky. Occasionally, he would conjure a small puff of cloud into the shape of a sheep, just for the quiet amusement of watching it drift lazily across the endless blue dot. In these moments, the mighty Zeus was not a fearsome king. He was not a warrior or a god to be feared. He was simply a tired bureaucrat, buried in the soft hum of routine. Evenings brought more meetings, this time with Poseidon, who would present detailed tide schedules and storm rotations. Poseidon's voice, deep and slow, often served as a perfect lullaby for Zeus, while Poseidon explained the complex interactions between sea currents and wind patterns. Zeus would fight the urge to let his head drop. The goddesses of the seasons, the Hera, also demanded time on his agenda. They would present intricate charts about the blooming of flowers, the ripening of fruits, and the arrival of migrating birds. Their voices were gentle, their charts meticulously illustrated, but to Zeus, it all blurred into one long, soothing rhythm. Then a time night settled over Mount Olympus. Zeus would drag himself back to his bed, his mind heavy not from the weight of war or the excitement of divine battles, but from the sheer volume of scrolls he had reviewed. Before closing his eyes, he would glance at the stack awaiting him for the next day, and in the quiet of his chamber, with the gentle breeze whispering through the marble halls, Zeus would murmur, "Perhaps tomorrow I will make a thunderstorm," just for the excitement. But he rarely did. More often than not, the next day would begin just as the last one had with Zeus, the king of the gods, unraveling yet another scroll about sunshine hours, rain allocations, and temple renovations. And somewhere, perhaps in the soft rhythms of those ancient clouds, in the slow rolling of the waves, in the distant humming of the wind, the king of the gods would find the most powerful thing of all: a peaceful, endless boredom. Athena's quiet library days. Athena, the goddess of wisdom, war, and strategy, was revered for her sharp intellect and unmatched knowledge. Many mortals envisioned her as a fierce protector, clad in armor, guiding heroes like Odysseus through the labyrinth of fate. But few know of her quieter days, the long, serene hours she spent in the immense, marble-walled library of Olympus, surrounded by silence and the soft rustle of parchment. The library was her sanctuary. It was said to be the largest repository of knowledge in the known world, its walls lined with scrolls, tomes, and clay tablets that reached to the vaulted ceiling, which itself was painted with a night sky of golden stars. In this library, Athena found not the thrill of battle, but the slow, deliberate comfort of order and learning. Every morning, after Zeus had begun his tedious paperwork, Athena would enter the library's grand hall, her footsteps echoing softly against the polished marble. She would pause by the vast central table, where new scrolls awaited her attention, reports from distant temples, new philosophical treatises from mortal scholars, and endless inventories from scribes cataloging. The stars thought her task, though seemingly mundane, was to organize this knowledge. Athena took great pride in ensuring that every scroll was precisely categorized, cross-referenced, and shelved according to her own intricate system. She would carefully unroll each parchment, reading its contents with patient curiosity before gently brushing the edges to remove any dust. The days would pass in slow, measured steps. She would move from shelf to shelf, inspecting labels, reordering sequences, and occasionally pausing to read an entire scroll, simply because the handwriting intrigued her. There were no urgent decisions here, no battles to plan, no heroes to advise, only the quiet, methodical rhythm of organization. She especially loved the sound the parchment made as she rolled and unrolled it, a soft, papery whisper that filled the silence of the library. Sometimes the sound would blend with the distant murmurs of the winds outside, creating a gentle symphony of stillness. On some days, Athena would spend hours reviewing star charts, verifying the placement of constellations with a delicate bronze compass. Each tiny correction was made with the precision of a goddess who cherished the minute details. The careful mapping of the heavens was not urgent, but Athena relished the slow passage of time spent among the stars. She had a particular fondness for the scrolls sent by mortal philosophers. Though most were filled with ponderous debates about ethics and the nature of existence, some were delightfully peculiar. Athena once spent an entire afternoon reading a scroll that detailed whether olive oil was a better offering to the gods than honey cakes. The scribe had written over 20 pages on the subject, complete with taste comparisons and hypothetical divine preferences. Athena smiled at such earnestness, though she rarely voiced her amusement. Every so often, Hermes would visit the library to deliver new scrolls. He would breeze in with his usual hurried energy, scattering papers as he went. Athena would raise an eyebrow, calmly retrieving the fallen scrolls and gently reminding him of the library's quiet order. "Slow steps, Hermes," she would chide softly. "Even speed must know when to pause." The messenger god would grin, but he always slowed his pace when near her shelves. When the sun reached its highest point, Athena would take her lunch, a simple meal of nectar and bread, seated by the tall windows that overlooked the mountains. She would eat slowly, savoring each bite while her eyes scanned the distant skies. Sometimes a hawk would pass by, its wings spread wide in the warm air currents. She would follow its journey until it disappeared from sight, then return to her scrolls. In the afternoons, she would often reorganize the section of mortal inventions. Mortals, with their restless curiosity, were always sending new designs and ideas. Athena would review their work carefully, sometimes making minor corrections with a fine-tipped quill, adding annotations that no mortal would ever see. There were scrolls describing watermills, chariots, early forms of clocks, and even intricate games involving pebbles and wooden boards. Athena admired their creativity, even if many of their designs were flawed. As the afternoon light softened, she would light oil lamps along the high shelves, their steady flames casting gentle glows across the polished floors. In this golden, tranquil light, Athena would retreat to a quiet corner where her personal journals were kept, These journals, bound in the softest leather, contained her reflections on the countless scrolls she had read. She would write slowly, her script neat and deliberate, recording not just facts, but thoughts about wisdom, about patience, about the quiet beauty of ordinary days. Doubt it was here, in the gentle scratch of quill on parchment, that Athena found her peace. Visitors to the library were rare. Occasionally, Artemis would stop by to borrow scrolls about the migration of deer or the blooming cycles of sacred flowers. The two goddesses would exchange few words, but their mutual respect was understood. Even Ares, the boisterous god of war, once stumbled into the library, searching for a misplaced spear design. He lasted no more than 10 minutes before the stillness drove him out, muttering about the lack of real action. Athena merely smiled and returned to her scrolls. Evenings in the library were the calmest. The soft flicker of lamplight, the gentle turning of pages, and the distant sounds of Olympus settling for the night filled the air with a serene lull. Athena would often lose track of time, her eyes following the steady march of words across the page, her fingers gently tracing the delicate fibers of ancient parchment. And when finally she would retire to her chambers, the quiet rhythm of her day would linger in her mind, a soft melody of order and contemplation. For in a world of gods and heroes, where storms raged and battles echoed, Athena found her solace not in the roar of war, but in the peaceful, steady hum of a quiet library, a place where wisdom breathed slowly, and the passing of time was a gentle companion. Poseidon's slow sea, counting Poseidon, the god of the sea, was known to mortals as the fierce shaker of the earth, the bringer of storms, and the ruler of the oceans. His name inspired both reverence and fear among sailors and coastal dwellers. Yet beneath this tempestuous image was a god who, like his brother Zeus, often found himself engaged in the slow and quiet rituals of divine responsibility. Poseidon's days were not always filled with thundering waves or raging tempests. More often than not, his work involved the patient, repetitive task of counting the waves. Every morning, as the soft pink hues of dawn spread over the surface of the sea, Poseidon would descend from his coral palace to the shoreline, trident in hand, not to stir the waters, but simply to observe and count. 1 wave, 2 waves, 3 waves. It was a task he had assigned to himself, a tradition he had upheld for centuries. The counting was not necessary for the sea to function, but Poseidon found peace in the rhythm. The endless cycle of waves rolling in and retreating was a steady, eternal lullaby. Sometimes he would sit on a rock, his trident resting beside him as he watched the white-capped waves approach the shore with quiet precision. He would lean forward slightly, counting under his breath, his voice blending with the soft crashing of the water. Double quotes, 80-7 ... 80-8 ... 80-9 ... The numbers were not recorded. There was no ledger to mark his progress. The purpose was not to tally, but to experience the gentle constancy of the sea. The waves did not demand attention. They simply arrived again and again, each one a quiet visitor to the sand. On particularly calm days, the waves were small, barely lapping at his feet. On those days, Poseidon would stretch out on the warm rocks, closing his eyes, letting the sound of the water wash over him as he continued to count in his mind. He would occasionally lose his place, but it did not trouble him. The waves would continue whether counted or not. Perhaps I was at 112, he would murmur, or was it 113? And then he would begin again. The sea had many moods, but Poseidon's favorite was its quiet one. The days when the winds were still and the surface shimmered like glass. On such days, he would trace patterns in the sand with the tip of his trident, doodling spirals and waves, watching as the tide slowly erased his drawings. His palace, though grand, was often left unattended during these serene hours. The merfolk and sea nymphs went about their own tasks, tending to coral gardens and guiding lost dolphins back to their pods. Poseidon's absence was not questioned. The god of the sea was, after all, always within his domain. One afternoon, Aphrodite, his wife, found him sitting quietly by a tide pool, watching a crab methodically scuttle across a rock. "You are unusually still today," she remarked, her voice as soft as the foam that kissed the shore. "I am counting the waves," he replied without looking away from the crab. "It is a good day for counting." She sat beside him, folding her hands neatly in her lap. "Do you ever finish?" "No," Poseidon said with a faint smile. "The sea is endless." "It does not need to finish," Aphrodite understood. They sat together for a long while, neither speaking, their silence punctuated only by the rhythmic crash of the surf dot sometimes. The other gods would send messages to Poseidon, requesting adjustments to the tides or inquiries about sea routes. Hermes, of course, was the frequent courier, his winged sandals barely making a sound as he approached. "Another request from Zeus," Hermes would announce, holding out a scroll. "He wishes to review the high tide schedules for the eastern coast." Poseidon would slowly take the scroll, unrolling it with deliberate care. "I will look into it tomorrow. Today I am counting waves." Hermes, always in a rush, would simply nod and vanish. On rare occasions, Poseidon would walk along the cliffs, his steps measured and slow. He would pause to watch seabirds glide on the wind, their wings steady against the bright sky. He admired their patience, their ability to hover, to wait. In these moments, Poseidon would think about the nature of waiting. The sea was always in motion, but it never hurried. Each wave took its time, each current moved at its own pace. He would sometimes visit the small islands scattered across his domain. These places, untouched by mortals, were his retreats. He would sit among the rocks, listening to the sea's soft breathing, the gentle slap of water against stone. One such island had a single weathered tree, its roots tangled in the rocky soil. Poseidon would lean against it, his trident resting nearby as he watched the waves continue their endless march. "Wave 305, he would whisper. 306. The numbers, simple and steady, marked the passage of time in a way that hours and days could not. The dolphins often accompanied him, their sleek bodies gliding through the waves. They seemed to understand his quiet task, sometimes leaping playfully, but always returning to swim alongside him as he walked the shore. The sea creatures knew Poseidon's rhythms. The turtles basked on the warm rocks, the seals dozed in the sun, and the fish darted lazily through the shallows. All moved with the same unhurried grace. In the evenings, when the sun dipped low and painted the waves with gold, Poseidon would return to his palace. The halls, adorned with coral columns and seashell mosaics, would be bathed in the soft, filtered light of the setting sun. He would retire to his chamber, where the sounds of the sea echoed gently through the open windows before settling to rest. He would gaze out over the ocean, its surface still glistening in the fading light. "Perhaps tomorrow I will start counting from the other side," he would muse, his voice low and calm. But tomorrow, like today, would bring the same peaceful routine. The waves would continue to arrive, one after another, each a quiet reminder of the sea's patient eternity. For Poseidon, the god of the sea, the greatest comfort was not in the power of storms or the force of earthquakes, but in the soft, steady counting of waves, a task with no end, no urgency, and no need for anything more. And so he counted in perfect, peaceful rhythm as the sea hummed its endless lullaby. Aphrodite's endless garden walks. Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, was known to mortals and gods alike for her dazzling charm and ethereal allure. Countless tales spoke of her power to inspire passion, to shape destinies with a mere glance, to draw lovers together with a breath of her divine essence. But beyond the legends, Aphrodite spent most of her immortal life wandering her sacred gardens, moving with languid grace through rows of fragrant flowers, not in search of admiration, but in quiet pursuit of the simple beauty of the world. Garden, nestled high upon the gentle slopes of Mount Olympus, was a realm unto itself. It stretched endlessly, a tapestry of soft pathways lined with ancient olive trees, sprawling rose bushes and delicate wildflowers that bloomed in eternal spring. The air was always warm, carrying the faint scent of jasmine and honeydod every morning. As the sky glowed softly with the blush of dawn, Aphrodite would rise from her silken bed, drape herself in flowing garments as light as the morning mist, and step barefoot onto the dew-kissed paths of her garden. She would begin her slow, deliberate walk, her fingers lightly brushing the petals of each flower she passed. One by one, she would pause to admire them. A single rose, its crimson hue rich and deep, a cluster of lilies, their white blooms tilted. Toward the sun, the curling vines that wrapped themselves gently around marble columns. Her pace was unhurried. Each step was a meditation, each breath an invitation to savor the smallest details. The garden was alive with color, but it was the quiet, almost unnoticed corners that drew her attention. She often lingered by a small pond, its surface perfectly still, save for the occasional ripple from a drifting petal. Here she would kneel, and watch as koi fish glided beneath the water lily, their movements slow and serene. The soft buzz of bees, the faint rustle of leaves, and the distant songs of doves created a soundscape as gentle as a lullaby. Aphrodite had no destination. Her walks had no agenda. She simply drifted from path to path, savoring the company of her flowers, her trees, and the endless, comforting rhythm of blooming and wilting dots. Sometimes she would find a fallen petal, delicate and bruised, and lift it carefully in her palm. "You are still beautiful," she would whisper, her voice soft and slow, before letting it float gently back to the earth. Her favorite moments were those spent in the rose labyrinth, a quiet maze of intertwined rose, bushes with petals that shimmered, and shades of gold and silver. It was here that she would often sit on a smooth stone bench, tracing idle patterns on the surface with her fingertip, watching the sunlight shift through the petals overhead. The labyrinth had no tricks, no confusing turns. It was a place of peace, where the only challenge was how long one could sit still and listen. Visitors were rare. Hermes would sometimes bring news, but Aphrodite would wave him off with a gentle hand, preferring to hear the distant rustling of leaves over the rushed delivery of messages. "The world can wait, dear Hermes," she would say, offering him a fig from a nearby tree. "There is always more time." Even Ares, the brash god of war and one of her most frequent companions, struggled to match her pace in the garden. His steps, always heavy, seemed out of place among the soft moss and delicate blooms. He would often grow impatient. "Do you not tire of walking in circles, Aphrodite?" he would ask, his voice rumbling with impatience. "Circles have no end, dear Ares," she would reply with a smile as light as a breeze. "That is their beauty." And so he would leave, his restless energy ill-suited to the garden's quiet embrace. Aphrodite would continue her walks, pausing to braid vines into soft wreaths, to cup her hands around a newly opened blossom, to listen to the whisper of the wind weaving through the tall cypress trees. Her attendants, the Carides, known as the Graces, would occasionally join her. They moved with the same gentle steps, their laughter like the tinkling of small bells as they wove garlands and hummed lullabies that drifted through the warm air. Together, they would gather fresh flowers, weaving crowns of daisies and violets, adorning the statues that dotted the garden. But even in their company, the atmosphere remained soft, slow, and unhurried. One afternoon, Aphrodite found a turtle resting near a sun-warmed stone. She knelt beside it, her fingertips gently grazing its patterned shell. "You understand, don't you?" she murmured. "The slow journey is the sweetest." The turtle, indifferent but content, remained by her side as she watched the clouds drift lazily across the sky. The garden seasons never changed. It was always spring, always blooming, always gently alive. Yet Aphrodite noticed every subtle shift, the unfurling of a single new leaf, the slow arc of a vine reaching for sunlight, the tender droop of a fading blossom that sometimes she would press a flower to her lips, breathing in its delicate fragrance, then let it fall back to the earth, trusting the garden to cradle it as it withered. Evening brought a golden softness to the garden. The light would filter through the petals, casting long, dappled shadows on the pathways. The warmth would linger on the stones, and Aphrodite would sit, her bare feet tucked beneath her, watching the fireflies rise from the grass like tiny lanterns. Her walks would continue into the twilight, guided by the silver glow of the moon and the faint shimmer of stars. Occasionally, she would visit the fountain at the heart of the garden, its waters gently trickling into a shallow pool. Here, she would trail her fingers through the cool surface, sending ripples that sparkled under the moonlight. "Another day well spent," she would whisper, her voice as soft as the breeze that stirred the petals. Her garden did not demand, did not rush, did not falter. It was a space of eternal calm, of quiet cycles, of beauty found in the smallest, slowest moments. Before retreating to her chambers, she would pause at the edge of the garden, turning one last time to admire the stillness she so cherished. "Tomorrow I shall walk these paths again," she would promise herself, "and I shall see something new, even if I have passed it 1,000 times." And so, day after day, year after year, Aphrodite walked, not to arrive, but simply to be among the flowers beneath the soft sky, in the quiet rhythm of her endless garden. Hestia's never-ending hearth, Hestia, the goddess of the hearth, the home, and the gentle flame, lived far from the tales of adventure and spectacle that colored the myths of other gods. Mortals offered her quiet prayers, lighting small fires in their homes in her honor, but few stories were told of her. She preferred it that way. Her world was not one of battles or passionate affairs. Hestia's realm was a world of small, steady rituals, the careful tending of the hearth, the folding of linens, the arrangement of simple meals. Her days began before the first light crept over Mount Olympus. In the dim silence of pre-dawn, Hestia would rise, her steps soft against the stone floors of her modest dwelling. Unlike the grand halls of Zeus or the fragrant gardens of Aphrodite, Hestia's home was small, warm, and endlessly tidy. The gentle crackling of the hearth fire accompanied her as she moved from room to room, checking the flame that never truly died. It was her sacred duty to keep the hearth flame burning, not just for herself, but for all of Olympus. This flame, ancient and pure, represented the heart of every home, every gathering, every quiet meal prepared in loving patience. Each morning, Hestia would kneel before the hearth, her hands cupped around a small bronze vessel of sacred oil. She would pour the oil slowly, her emotions deliberate, the scent of olive wood smoke filling the room as she whispered soft blessings. The fire, in return, would flicker gently as though it understood her care. Hestia found comfort in repetition. She would sweep the stone floors, arrange bowls of fresh fruit, and carefully fold linen so that their edges met perfectly. No task was too small for her attention. Each movement, each breath was measured, patient, and filled with quiet devotion. Visitors rarely lingered in Hestia's home. Gods like Ares and Hermes found the slow pace unbearable, though they respected her quiet presence. When Hermes occasionally dropped by to deliver a message, he would pace restlessly as Hestia calmly folded napkins or arranged wooden utensils with precise alignment. The others are preparing grand feasts, Hermes would say, shifting from foot to foot. Zeus is summoning storms, Poseidon is counting his waves, and you're replacing spoons. The spoons must be in their proper place, Hestia would reply. Softly, her calm voice steadying the restless air around him. Without them, even a grand feast would be incomplete. Hermes would nod, understanding in his own way. Before quickly departing in the afternoons, Hestia would often visit the communal hearth at the center of Olympus. This sacred fire burned not just for the gods, but symbolically for all homes across the mortal world. She would sit beside it, her hands resting gently on her lap, watching the slow, curling dance of the flames. Sometimes she would hum a simple tune, one that no one had taught her, but had always seemed to be there, resting softly on her lips. Other gods passed by, some stopping briefly to warm their hands, others pausing only for a moment before moving on to their grander tasks. Few stayed as long as Hestia. Artemis would sometimes join her, resting silently by the hearth, the two sharing quiet moments without the need for words. They found comfort in each other's stillness. Apollo would occasionally sit with his lyre, plucking soft melodies that drifted like warm air around the hearth. His music did not disturb the calm. Instead, it seemed to settle into the rhythm of the flames, but mostly, Hestia tended the fire alone. She took simple pleasure in arranging the logs just so, ensuring the embers glowed steadily, never too fierce, never too faint. When the fire crackled too loudly, she would adjust it, coaxing it back into a gentle hum. In the evenings, Hestia would return to her own hearth, where a small pot of stew often simmered slowly over the low flame. She would sit nearby, carefully peeling fruit, each strip of skin falling in perfect curls onto a small wooden plate. She would eat slowly, savoring each bite, pausing to listen to the soft popping of the firewood, the rhythmic ticking of a small bronze timepiece Hermes had once gifted her. Her nights were spent in quiet rituals, folding cloths, tending to her herb garden, writing simple reflections in a well-worn journal with soft, steady script. Today, the flame flickered slightly when Apollo played his lyre, she would write. It was a pleasant flicker. On some nights, she would place fresh flowers in small vases, adjusting their stems until they sat just right. These were not grand bouquets, but small, simple arrangements, each flower chosen with care. Her world was not one of urgency. The tasks she tended to could always wait until tomorrow, yet she chose to complete them today, not out of duty, but out of a quiet love for the simple order of things. When mortals offered prayers at their home hearths, Hestia would hear them faintly, like soft ripples in a distant pond. She would pause, close her eyes, and offer a silent blessing in return. May your hearth burn steady. She did not need grand temples or festivals in her honor. Her presence was felt in every quiet home, in the crackling of every fire, in the warmth that gathered around shared meals. One winter morning, Dionysus, god of wine and revelry, visited her hearth, bringing with him the faint scent of grapes and laughter. Why not join us, Hestia? The halls are filled with music, with dance, with stories. Hestia smiled, her hands resting gently on the edge of her hearth. There's music here too, Dionysus. The kind that lingers in the quiet. Dionysus grinned, understanding more than he. Led on, and left her to her steady flame. Seasons passed, though on Olympus, time moved as it pleased. Still, Hestia's routines never faltered. Day after day, she swept the floors, tended the fire, arranged simple meals, folded cloths, and blessed the hearths of mortals. She found joy not in the grand gestures of the gods, but in the steady rhythm of simple tasks repeated with care. Before resting each night, she would sit before her hearth, watching the low, glowing embers, breathing slowly, allowing the warmth to settle deep within her bones. Tomorrow, I will sweep again, she would whisper to the fire. I will place the spoons, I will fold the linens, and I will tend to the flame." The fire crackled softly in agreement, for Hestia, goddess of the hearth, the heart of all homes, it was not the grandeur of Olympus that mattered, but the peaceful hum of ordinary days, lived gently, one quiet moment at a time. Hermes and the endless errands. Hermes, the messenger of the gods, was known for his speed, his wit, and his ability to move effortlessly between the mortal and divine realms. To mortals, he appeared as a blur, a flash of winged sandals, a trickster who could bend time itself. But despite his reputation for quickness, Hermes spent most of his immortal days running errands, small, ceaseless errands that never quite ended. Each morning, before the rest of Olympus had properly stirred, Hermes would already be up, lacing his winged sandals with practiced care, the straps perfectly aligned. His staff, the caduceus, rested lightly against his shoulder as he reviewed his scroll of daily tasks. Deliver a message to Poseidon, collect scrolls from Athena, retrieve a lost lyre string for Apollo, carry sweet figs from Demeter's groves to Artemis, and of course the never-ending missives from Zeus. Hermes sighed, though not unhappily. He had long since accepted that the nature of his days was motion. Still, there was something soothing about the predictability of his work. His first stop would often be Poseidon, who could usually be found by the sea, counting waves. Hermes would descend swiftly, the breeze trailing behind him, only to wait patiently as Poseidon finished his current count. 315, 316, ... Hermes would wait, tapping his foot in the soft sand, until Poseidon paused long enough to accept the scroll. "A message from Zeus," Hermes would announce, "concerning high tides near the eastern ports. I will read it tomorrow." Poseidon would reply without looking up. Hermes would nod and be off again, soaring above the waves toward Athena's grand library. There, he would collect bundles of parchment small, carefully tied scrolls filled with her meticulous notes. Athena, always precise, would offer him a new list of deliveries. "Please take these to the northern temples," she would say, her voice steady. "And this one to Hestia, she enjoys a good riddle." "Of course," Hermes would respond, tucking the scrolls safely into his satchel, and then he would be on his way again, zigzagging across the skies, his sandals leaving faint ripples in the clouds. Despite his reputation for haste, Hermes did not always rush. He found small pleasures in his endless journeys, the smell of fresh olive groves as he passed Demeter's fields, the shimmer of dew on Artemis's hunting grounds, the faint music drifting from Apollo's temple. Sometimes he would slow his pace just to feel the cool breeze brush his face, or to watch the gentle unfolding of a morning bloom. He had no grand throne, no vast halls. His world was the sky, the roads, the quiet footpaths between temples. Hermes was always moving, but not always in a hurry. His errands were many and varied. He would guide lost travelers back to safe paths, deliver forgotten sandals to careless nymphs, return wayward arrows to Artemis, and carry small bundles of sweet honey cakes from Hestia's hearth to the distant edges of Olympus. The other gods often marveled at his patience. "You spend your days carrying figs?" Ares would ask, incredulous. "I carry stories," Hermes would reply with a soft smile. "In every scroll, in every message, there is a thread that weaves us together." Some days, Hermes would pause by small mountain streams to watch the water ripple over stones. He would sit briefly, savoring the rare stillness, before another call for his swift feet would send him into the skies once more. Occasionally, mortals would glimpse him, just a shimmer, a shadow, the faint sound of sandals brushing the air. They would whisper of the fleeting god, the one who passed unseen but was always near. His favorite deliveries, though, were the ones to Hestia. She would always welcome him with a small bowl of stew or a perfectly arranged piece of fruit. They would sit together, Hermes resting briefly, savoring the quiet warmth of her hearth, Your errands never end, do they? She would ask, gently stirring the fire. No, Hermes would reply, watching the flames dance. But neither do the paths. I think I like that. When his sandals began to hum, urging him onward, he would rise, his satchel filled with fresh scrolls and small gifts. Until next time, Hestia, travel safely, Hermes. And off he would go, following the endless roads of Olympus, the silver wings. On his sandals glinting in the sunlight, some errands were urgent. Zeus's scrolls, always marked with his bold seal, required swift delivery. Hermes would glide through the skies, weaving between clouds, balancing the weight of the king of gods' impatience with the delicate rhythm of his own steady pace. Other errands were more peculiar. Dionysus might request a delivery of wild grapes, freshly plucked and still glistening with morning dew. On one memorable occasion, Hermes was tasked with returning a flock of scattered songbirds to Apollo, who had misplaced them during a particularly energetic lyre performance. They went that way, Apollo had gestured vaguely. All of them? Some of them. Hermes had laughed and spent the afternoon gently guiding the birds back, using soft whistles and patient hand gestures. No task was too small, no errand beneath his. Attention. At times, he would visit mortal villages, leaving behind small tokens, a polished stone, a feather, a glinting coin, little reminders that he had passed through. These gifts became treasured charms, whispered about in stories past. From parent to child, his journeys continued into the soft blue evenings, the stars lighting his path as he moved through the sky. Occasionally, he would pause atop a high ridge to watch the horizon fade into gentle dusk, the world below settling into quiet. Tomorrow, there will be more errands, he would say to himself, not with weariness, but with a kind of fond acceptance. And indeed, each day brought new scrolls, new requests, new paths to follow. Hermes never stayed long in one place, but he left behind a quiet trail, a scroll delivered, a message safely carried, a fig placed gently on a marble step. For Hermes, god of messengers, the beauty was not in the arrival, but in the steady, endless journey, carried one soft step, one careful delivery at a time. Demeter's slow seasons. Demeter, the goddess of the harvest and the gentle guardian of the seasons, was best known for the grand cycles of planting and reaping, of life growing and life resting. But the rhythms of the world moved not in haste, but in a patient, soothing pace that Demeter herself deeply cherished. Unlike the tempestuous Zeus or the restless Hermes, Demeter's world was one of slow change. She was not drawn to sudden victories or sharp bursts of celebration. Instead, she found comfort in the quiet unfolding of time, the slow turning of the soil, the delicate stretching of young shoots toward the sun, the steady ripening of fruit. Morning, Demeter would walk barefoot through the soft, tilled earth of her sacred fields. She would pause often to gently brush her fingertips against the tender green shoots emerging from the soil, her touch as light as the morning mist that clung to the leaves. "Good morning, little ones," she would whisper to the barley and the wheat. "Today, you may stretch a little taller." The earth responded not with words, but with the soft scent of dew and the warm promise of sunlight. Demeter's days were marked by a slow, unbroken rhythm. She would bend to plant seeds, carefully spacing each one in its shallow bed. She did not hurry. The planting could take days, and she preferred it that way. Each seed was worthy of her attention, each furrow in the earth smoothed with loving hands. Her companion, Persephone, would sometimes join her, her laughter bright as she wove flower crowns from wild blossoms scattered at the edge of the fields. "Mother, must you move so slowly?" Persephone would ask with a teasing grin. "Growth cannot be rushed, my dear," Demeter would reply, tucking a daisy into Persephone's dark hair. The sweetest fruits come to those who wait. When Persephone spent her months in the underworld, Demeter's pace slowed even more. The field seemed to sigh with her, the plants growing gently but with a quiet solemnity. The seeds still sprouted, the rain still came, but there was a hush that settled over the land. In these times, Demeter would walk her fields alone, the hem of her green gown brushing the tops of the grass. She would stop to kneel beside the budding vines, pressing her palms to the warm soil as if to listen to its heartbeat. She found solace in the slow churn of the seasons. The passing clouds, the distant hum of bees, the careful spirals of snails making their way across stones, all were gentle reminders that life moves steadily, and that each moment held its quiet purpose. The other gods often marveled at her patience. Why? Not simply will the fields to bloom in an instant, Apollo once asked as he strummed his lyre nearby. Demeter smiled softly, her hands dusty with soil. Because, dear Apollo, the wait is part of the beauty. Her afternoons were often spent in her grain houses, where she carefully sifted through golden kernels, sorting them with deliberate precision. She enjoyed the soft rustle of the grain between her fingers, the delicate sound of seeds tumbling into wooden bowls. She would prepare small bundles of wheat and barley to send to Hestia, who would use them in her gentle hearth fires. The two shared a quiet bond, both goddesses finding joy in the humble rhythms of daily life. Hermes, with his ever-present errands, would frequently pass through Demeter's lands. Another bundle for Hestia? He would ask, already reaching for the neatly tied sheaf of grain. Yes, and tell her I send warm wishes for a steady flame, Demeter would reply. Brushing stray stalks from her skirt, Hermes would grin and dash away, leaving Demeter to her slow tending. When the sun lowered in the sky, painting the fields in warm gold, Demeter would pause her work to admire the long shadows stretching over the land. She would sit among the wildflowers, plucking soft petals and letting them drift on the breeze. Her connection to the mortals was deep and constant. She could sense their quiet prayers as they planted their own fields, as they knelt to offer small thanks at their hearths. She answered them not with grand gestures, but with steady rains, gentle sunshine, and soil rich with promise. Demeter's joy was not in quick rewards, but in the long patience of tending. She would visit mortal villages, walking among the farmers, her presence soft and comforting, like the cool shade of a tree on a summer's day. The mortals would not always know she was there, but they would feel the warmth in their harvests, the ease in their labors. On rare occasions, Dionysus would appear, bringing with him baskets of plump grapes and stories of revelry. You should join our feast, Demeter, he would insist, offering her goblets of sweet wine. Demeter would smile gently, declining with a wave of her hand. My feast is here in the slow ripening of the fields. Dionysus would laugh, understanding her answer, but still encouraging her to taste the grapes, which she always did with polite enjoyment. In the quiet of early evening, Demeter would often light a small oil lamp and sit by her window, watching the stars begin to appear, their soft light reflecting in her calm eyes. She would write simple notes on sheets of parchment, noting which seeds sprouted first, which rains came early, which flowers lingered longer than expected. Patience brings the sweetest harvest, she would write, her script careful and even. Even the smallest seed with time will rise. When Persephone returned each year, the fields would burst into bloom once more, their colors vivid, their fragrance rich. Mother and daughter would walk together through the tall grass, their hands brushing the soft heads of grain. You have waited well, Persephone would say, admiring the golden fields. The waiting is part of the growing, Demeter would reply her, voice a steady hum beneath the breeze. And so Demeter's days continued, each one marked by gentle work, by quiet tending, by the soft pulse of the earth beneath her bare feet. For Demeter, the goddess of the harvest, there was no need for haste. The seasons would turn, the seeds would grow, and the world would unfold. one slow, beautiful moment at a time. Hephaestus and the careful crafting, far from the grand halls of Olympus, in a quiet forge nestled among the volcanic cliffs, Hephaestus, the god of fire and craftsmanship, spent his days in steady, focused creation. Unlike the hurried deeds of the other gods, Hephaestus moved with deliberate slowness, each strike of his hammer thoughtful, each piece of his work refined through patient, careful attention. His forge was a place of soft, glowing embers, the air warm and thick with the scent of smooth metal and polished stone. Tools of all kinds, hammers, tongs, chisels, were arranged meticulously along the walls, each with its own precise place. The mornings began with Hephaestus quietly tending to the fires. He would add coals with gentle hands, stirring the embers until they glowed just right, their soft crackling a familiar, soothing song. Unlike other gods who summoned lightning or commanded storms, Hephaestus preferred to coax the flames, adjusting their warmth with small, steady breaths. When the fires reached the perfect heat, he would begin his work. Some days he forged delicate bracelets for Aphrodite, their golden loops twisted like vines. Other days he shaped fine goblets for Dionysus, each one bearing gentle curves and intricate etchings. His pace never quickened. Even when the gods placed urgent requests, Hephaestus would work with the same careful rhythm, his hammer rising and falling with a steady heartbeat. Visitors to his forge would find him often pausing to study a half-finished piece, turning it slowly in his hands, inspecting every line and curve. "Why do you take so long?" Hermes once asked, perched on a nearby stool, his winged sandals twitching with impatience. "The metal speaks softly," Hephaestus replied, his voice deep and calm. "If you rush, you will not hear what it says." He would polish the surface of a bronze shield until it shone like still water, tracing his fingers over its edge to feel for even the slightest flaw. His touch was as gentle as the caress of a breeze. Though his hands were broad and strong. At midday, he would often rest, sitting quietly beside the forge, sipping a simple broth from a clay bowl. He would listen to the rhythmic drip of water from the cooling basins, the faint hum of the coals settling into their steady heat. He found beauty in repetition. The steady turning of the grindstone, the even strokes of a file, the careful threading of delicate chains, all brought him a peaceful satisfaction. Aphrodite, when she visited, would sit quietly by his side, watching the soft play of firelight on his face. "You make beautiful things," she would say softly. "Beauty is born from patience," Hephaestus would reply, not looking up from his work. The two shared a quiet understanding, their moments together as gentle and unhurried as the forging of his delicate creations. Hephaestus also crafted small gifts for the mortals, simple charms, well-balanced tools, sturdy pots, each made with the same care he gave to the golden thrones of Olympus. He took pleasure in imagining the mortal hands that would one day hold them. When delivering his creations to the other gods, he would walk slowly, carrying each item with great care. Even the war helmets of Ares were delivered with a soft cloth, carefully draped over their polished surfaces. Ares, eager for his new weapons, would often urge him to work faster. "Surely you can strike the iron with greater speed." "Speed does not make it strong," Hephaestus would answer with a soft shake of his head. "Strength comes from the time you give it." In the quiet evenings, when the fires had dimmed to a soft orange glow, Hephaestus would carefully clean his tools, wiping each one with gentle strokes, placing them back in their perfect places along the forge walls. He would then sit by the edge of his workshop, looking out across the darkening cliffs, the sea far below glinting faintly under the moonlight. The cool air would settle around him, carrying the distant, rhythmic crashing of waves. Sometimes he would sketch new designs, his charcoal moving slowly across the parchment, each line deliberate, each curve considered. "Tomorrow I will shape "You," he would murmur to the outlines of a new brooch, a new goblet, a new pendant. His forge was never silent, but its music was gentle, the crackling of coals, the soft clang of his hammer, the whispering brush of cloth against polished metal. Mortals who prayed to Hephaestus would feel his blessings not in sudden miracles, but in the steady reliability of their tools, in the quiet endurance of a well-forged plow, in the comforting weight of a simple, strong cup. Hephaestus visited the mortal world often, not in grand displays, but in quiet walks through villages, observing the work of blacksmiths and potters, nodding in silent approval when he saw their patient craft. The seasons changed. He adjusted the fires in his forge, mindful of the shifting air. The coolness of winter called for deeper embers. The warmth of summer invited slower burns. The other gods would often gather at festivals, their laughter and music filling the skies. Hephaestus would sometimes attend, sitting quietly at the edge, watching the flickering torches and listening to the distant lyres. He would return to his forge with fresh ideas, crafting small trinkets to remember the music, the colors, the sounds. His joy was not in speed, nor in the grandeur of battles, but in the simple, patient creation of things that would last, things that would be held and used, things that would endure beyond the fleeting moments of revelry. Before he slept each night, he would whisper to his quiet forge, "Tomorrow we will craft again." And the embers would glow softly in response, their steady warmth ready to meet the dawn. The quiet threads of Olympus, as the soft winds of Olympus drifted through its golden halls and quiet groves. The stories of the gods continued, each moving at its own gentle pace. Though the myths that mortals shared often sang of grand battles, mighty storms, and passionate affairs, there existed another rhythm, a quieter pulse that wove steadily through the life of the immortals. Zeus would still sit at his great throne, his scrolls never quite finished, the weight of Olympus balanced carefully in his steady hands. Athena would continue her long hours in the quiet libraries, the rustle of parchment and the soft echo of turning pages her faithful companions. Poseidon would forever count his waves, each roll of the sea a soft reminder that some tasks, no matter how vast, were never meant to end. Aphrodite would walk her blooming gardens endlessly, tending each petal, each vine, with a patience as deep as the oceans Poseidon ruled. Hestia would keep her hearth burning, the steady warmth of home and the quiet glow of shared meals, bringing peace to those who paused by her side. Hermes would continue his endless errands, his winged sandals brushing through the skies, his journey its own quiet reward. Demeter would tend her fields, her touch blessing each seed, each sprout, each golden stalk, her patience growing alongside her harvests. Hephaestus would forge and shape, the soft clang of his hammer a lullaby of careful creation, each piece a testament to the beauty of slow, thoughtful work in the mortal world. Those who built their homes, those who planted their fields, those who tended their fires, and those who crafted with care would unknowingly carry the soft blessings of these patient gods. For while the great Thales roared through the ages, it was in the quiet moments that Olympus truly lived, in the slow folding of linens, in the counting of waves, in the turning of a single page, in the tending of a study. Flamed up the gods did not always need to hurry. They did not always need to dazzle. Some of them, the ones who found peace in the ordinary, wove their stories in the softest threads that whispered gently across time. And as the fires dimmed, as the scrolls were set aside, as the fields settled under the evening sky, the gods would rest, their hearts soothed by the small, steady rhythms of their days. In this way, Olympus remained not always grand, not always loud, but quietly alive, one patient, peaceful moment at a time.